So let's talk about Highguard, the game that hit a massive peak of nearly 100,000 players at launch, only to lose a catastrophic 96% of them in just a few days. How does a game with this much initial hype and interest die so fast? How does a studio full of veteran talent from games like Apex Legends and Titanfall get it so wrong? Today we are going to break down the main factors as to why this game is already dead on arrival and created gaming's latest launch disaster. It all started in December 2025 at the Game Awards. The show was winding down and everyone was waiting for that one last huge reveal. And what we got was...
I've played it, and after you see this trailer, I think you're going to want to as well. Welcome to Highguard.
A surprise announcement from a game nobody had heard of from a brand new studio called Wildlight Entertainment. The trailer was, to put it mildly, confusing. It showed a fantasy shooter with heroes, mounts, and base rating, but it left most people scratching their heads. The internet's reaction was a collective meh. After this lukewarm debut, the developers went completely dark for almost 2 months. This led to a ton of speculation. Would the game be delayed? Was it another Concord situation where it will be dead on arrival? But behind the curtain, there was a pedigree that made you pay attention. Wildlight Entertainment was founded by former Respawn developers, the minds behind the slick genre-defining movement of Titanfall and the insanely popular Apex Legends. This radio silence was apparently by design, an attempt to copy the legendary Shadow Drop that made Apex an overnight sensation. The studio's CEO, Dusty Welch, even mentioned that Jeff Keighley himself was a friend who loved the game and offered them the final prestigious slot in his show. And for an unknown studio, that's just an offer that you can't refuse. So the hype started to build. A free-to-play raid shooter from the creators of some of the best FPS games ever made? On paper, it sounded like a guaranteed hit and the stage was set. Then on January 26th, 2026, Highguard launched on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and for a minute, it looked like it was a massive success. Driven by streamer hype, free-to-play access, and the buzz from its reveal, the game exploded, hitting a peak of 97,000 concurrent players on Steam alone. For a brand new IP, that is a massive win. But that moment was incredibly short-lived. The triumph didn't even last a day. The unraveling began almost immediately, starting with the game's technical state. So what went so wrong? The first and most obvious problem was performance. Players on all platforms were hit with a tidal wave of technical issues. Widespread crashes plagued the PC version as servers buckled under the load. It wasn't just PC either. PS5 players reported crashes when leaving matches, and anyone with a slower hard drive was in for a world of pain. The game just felt completely unoptimized. Even people with high-end rigs and top-of-the-line graphics cards reported blurry visuals and unstable frame rates that would often dip below 100 FPS in a fight. The game was also hammered for buggy hit feedback, matchmaking errors, and a broken friends list on Xbox and PC. The Steam reviews turned into a sea of red. The consensus was clear, the game felt like it was in early access. While Wildlight did respond with emergency patches that they claimed cut crashes by 90% and added things like an FOV slider for consoles, the damage was already done. For tens of thousands of players, their first impression wasn't an exciting new shooter, it was a game that just didn't work. Even for those who could actually get the game to run, a deeper problem was waiting. The core gameplay loop was described by many as bland, soulless, and just not fun. The biggest and most common complaint was about the map design and pacing. Highguard launched as a 3v3 shooter, but the maps were gigantic. This meant teams spent most of their time wandering through vast, empty landscapes just looking for resources or the enemy. There was barely any action, which is a fatal flaw for a raid shooter. But honestly, in my opinion, I actually enjoyed the gameplay. The combat actually felt pretty good, but I can agree that the pacing is just bad and annoyingly slow. The game's whole identity felt confused. It tried to mix hero abilities, raid mechanics, base building, and gunplay, but to many, none of it felt polished or new. Players criticized everything from the generic art style to the awful hit feedback and uninspired hero designs. Even with 8 heroes, 10 weapons, and 5 maps at launch, it felt empty and mismatched. It was a classic jack of all trades, master of none. It just existed in this weird, boring middle ground. In a market flooded with amazing free-to-play shooters, just being okay isn't good enough. Highguard failed to answer the most important question for any new live service game. Why should I play this over everything else? For most players, it gave them no reason at all. And while I do understand where people are coming from, I do feel like the gameplay is just unique enough to have a place in the FPS space. I also have seen many comments all over the place trying to compare games to Highguard that quote, do things better, like comparing it to the likes of Valorant, Overwatch, Apex, Rainbow Six, among many other games, and if I'm being honest, that's the most idiotic take anyone can make on this game. If you are trying to say the game is not unique and different and then proceed to compare it to like 5 other games, then clearly Highguard has something here that is different. But thanks to the negative feedback, the consequences were swift and brutal. The player count didn't just drop, it fell off a cliff. After that initial peak of nearly 100,000 players, the game hemorrhaged players. And by its 4th day, the player base had plummeted by a staggering 96%, leaving fewer than 4,000 people in the game. This wasn't your typical launch week dip. This was a mass exodus, a complete rejection of the game. The initial hype fueled by streamers and the Game Awards vanished instantly, replaced by overwhelmingly negative word of mouth. On Steam, the game's review score quickly sank to overwhelmingly negative as nearly 15,000 negative reviews poured in, burying the few positive ones. Players who had only spent a few hours in the game were leaving reviews wondering why it was even released. The sentiment was so bad that the launch was immediately compared to other infamous industry flops. But facing a total catastrophe, Wildlight Entertainment didn't go silent. They jumped into crisis mode, talking to the community and pushing out updates as fast as they could. The CEO publicly pushed back on comparisons to other failed games and the studio got to work. Their first moves targeted the biggest complaints. Emergency patches rolled out to fix stability and performance. In a direct response to the criticism about the slow, empty 3v3 matches, the developers quickly added a 5v5 mode. While some felt it was chaotic and rushed, it was a clear sign that the studio was listening and willing to make big changes, but I do think the 5v5 game mode fixes a good amount of initial complaints. More importantly, Wildlight revealed an incredibly ambitious Year 1 game plan. This 2026 roadmap laid out a packed schedule with 7 episodes set to drop new content almost every month. The plan includes 6 more heroes, 5 new bases, 3 new maps, more weapons, a ranked mode, and other new systems, all promised for free. By the end of 2026, Highguard is supposed to be a completely different game, nearly doubling its hero roster and massively expanding its content. The developers, hardened by their time on huge hits like Apex, claims they have thick skin and are in it for the long haul. They say they had this content ready to go, a big difference from the post-launch silence that initially hurt Apex Legends. So, can Highguard be saved? Its launch will go down as a textbook example of how not to release a live service game. It was the perfect storm, a confusing marketing message, a technically broken product, and core gameplay that just couldn't hold an audience in a cutthroat genre. The game was clearly rushed, leaning on a developer pedigree that couldn't protect it from its own deep-seated flaws. But I do feel a good amount of this hype was something the developers never really wanted, and Jeff Keighley brought unnecessary hype and expectations toward this game. But the story might not be over. Unlike other failures where the developers disappeared, Wildlight is showing a real commitment to fixing their game. Their aggressive roadmap and their willingness to make huge changes like adding 5v5 suggests they still believe in the project's potential. In a strange way, the disastrous launch might have been a blessing in disguise, forcing them to listen to player feedback from day one. The road to redemption will be incredibly steep. Rebuilding trust and convincing players to come back is one of the hardest things to do in this industry. Highguard stands as a cautionary tale about how important it is to have a polished, fun experience from the very first minute. But in the world of live service games, a bad launch isn't always the end. For Highguard, it's a fight for survival that will decide if it's remembered as a forgotten failure or becomes an unlikely comeback story. I personally have hope for them, and I do think they could turn things around and we could be looking at a future comeback game of the year in the future. But if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching, and leave a like and comment below on your thoughts on Highguard and if you think it can make a comeback. And if you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button for more videos in the future, as well as they help me hit my goal of 2,500 subscribers. But thank you guys so much for all the support you show on the channel. It truly means so much to me, and I will see you guys in the next one.